Okay, good morning or good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you are. Welcome to our 101st Reading Online Sport Economics Seminar. This week we should have Benedikt Schmal from Duesseldorf, but we've actually got Benedikt Schmal from an airport near a hotel near City Airport in London. Thanks to the competence of British Airways. Nonetheless, the wonders of technology mean that he can still present despite being holed up in a hotel by an airport. Before Benedikt gives his presentation, just a couple of bits of admin. So the first one is just to flag up something that Alex has shared on Twitter in viral nature this week, namely that we have a new sport economics journal, the Sports Economics Review, which the two editors-in-chief are very regular participants in the Roses series. So Alex, who's here, and Stefan, who currently is walking in Scotland. So we're going to let him off this week, but he is regularly with us. Sports Economics Review has its first paper published. I don't, can I access it from this page, Alex? Yes, I can. There we go. Maradona plays Minimax, Ignacio Palacios Huerta. And also a second paper as well. So we've got two papers in the Sport Economics Review. And please do consider this for your sport economics papers or papers that use sport to consider and learn more about economics. The thing I'm going to flag, I've done it already, but if you do want a chance to come and visit us here in Reading again, if you've been recently, as Benedikt was, and others have been, you want another chance to come, perhaps when it's not 30 plus degrees, we're going to have the second Reading Football Economics Workshop on December the 13th and 14th, dates chosen to coincide with the semi-finals of the World Cup. So whoever's playing, we will watch the World Cup semi-finals here in Reading after some fine quality football economics work. And as the blurb says on the webpage, which I'll put the link in the chat, football is defined fairly liberally, and also we're quite happy to define economics fairly liberally as well. If you're interested in attending, do let us know. Our two keynote speakers are also people who have presented in the Roses series. So Jorge Tovar from University of Los Andes in Colombia, and also Justus Harkap from the Duesseldorf Institute for Competition Economics will be the two keynote speakers for that conference in December. Back to today, we have got Benedikt Schmal presenting his paper, which was also presented last week at the Math Sport conference. But I'm quite keen to listen to it again because I was in the other parallel session at the time. This is called Rabbits Caught in the Headlights, Experts, Crowd Wisdom and Belief Updating. So Benedikt, please do take away your presentation.
Yes, thank you, James. Thank you for the nice introduction. I'm going to share the screen. So I hope you should now can see it in full screen mode.
Oh, no, it's gone. It's unshared somehow.
It's unshared.
It was there, then it went.
Let's see. All right.
There it goes, back again.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm not sure whether full screen mode switches the broadcasting off.
Control L should get you into full screen from there, I think. Yeah. No, it didn't. It turned it off again. Okay, so we had to go.
That's control. It was Control L. Okay, then I do it without the full screen. I mean, you should see it anyway.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah. Without further ado, after this trial and error, yeah, the paper is called Rabbits Caught in the Headlights: Experts, Crowd Wisdom, and Belief Updating, and it is jointly or joint work with Kai Fischer, who's also here in the presentation, and yeah, I'm really happy to give you what I would call it a progress report, because this is really a work in progress at the moment, and we are both happy to get any suggestions from you. So this is a sports paper, but it's mostly, I think, an information economics paper. And information economics because we work mostly with betting markets, and we try to understand using these betting data and sports data how experts and to a smaller extent crowd wisdom reacts to novel information. All right, so the research question is basically an old economic question, and is how do economic agents incorporate new information? And we know the Homo economicus textbook Econ 101 example that a rational agent uses all information available, and she updates immediately here her beliefs, and she can distinguish between useful and useless information. So she's super rational and always knows, okay, this is helpful, this is not helpful in an ideal world. But of course, in the real world, we know this is not the case. We know that there are biases, there are heuristics that drive people's behavior and might also drive their belief updating and information incorporation. So our question is, how do informed agents react in a high stakes environment, which are betting markets for us, and in a low stakes environment, which are the transfer market values, you might know, to new information. I start with a brief summary of what we do and what we find to give you already an information here before I go into more detail. And what we do is we use betting data from 29 bookmakers for roughly 1,400 matches in Germany and Italy, especially particularly in Germany's first Bundesliga and Italy's Serie A. And we use the market value data for all players in these leagues. Market values here as transfer market values. We apply a difference in difference setting to estimate the causal effects of the incorporation of novel information into prediction market outcomes. And we find actually unclear results that do not follow a clear behavioral pattern. And this is why we, at least at the current state, believe that there is some market inefficiency in this information incorporation. All right, so let's start with the data. The betting data comes from oddsportal.com, which is a major source for bookmaker data. And this is also maybe a shout out to James, because he hinted us at this website and he also supported us in scraping the data there. From the website, we have, as already mentioned, 2 countries, Germany and Italy, and their Premier Leagues. And we have 2 seasons, the 2019-2020 season and the 2020-2021 season. So you all know, I guess, that seasons usually begin in late summer, in August or September, and end in late spring, roughly in May. And then we use as information shocks COVID-19 infections. And now directly a huge disclaimer, this is not a COVID paper. This is an information economics paper, but not about like what does COVID does here, does COVID do here or there, but it's we just use COVID-19 as an information shock. We have 233 clearly identified infections that we can take from an earlier paper Kai and I have written together with James here, the COVID-19 productivity paper you might have heard of. And we use this information and we use COVID-19 because we have clear information which player was infected and subsequently missing for a team at which time. So we have a clear identification, we have clear dates, and this is different to any other infection where players are missing, because they're reporting, the media coverage is much weaker. The infection data uses the announcement of an infection as the infection date, so to say, which we consider as reliable because the clubs tested several times a week. So maybe there was an infection on Tuesday, but there was a test in Wednesday, and as soon as it is positive, we get the reporting at Wednesday. And which is more important, I mean, the infection itself might have happened on Monday or Sunday, and then it takes time until the virus replicates in your body. But important is, when does a player miss a match due to infection? And last, the data on market values we also are obtained from transfermarkt.de, which is one of the world's largest platforms for such data and also widely used. I've seen Thomas Peters here in the room, in the virtual room. I think he's also written about it. And we use this to look how the data, the market value data react. All right. So let's get to the empirical strategy of this paper. We do a different setting for causal inference. So we compare the pre-infection outcomes and post-infection outcomes with not affected teams. What means pre and post infection? In our case, this is actually the announcement of a new infection, which means the player is definitely missing for the next match, because we have the legal obligation to quarantine the player. You all know this. Up to now, we still have people all over the place being quarantined, and therefore we have labor shortages, for example, in all over Europe. And the causal identification in econometric terms is that the COVID-19 infection timing is an unanticipated exogenous timing of this information shock. So this is unanticipated by the teams. Of course, there are matches and there is the risk that a player gets infected, but no one really knows when it happens. Second, we have two different estimation times. We have the basic, so to say, static different diff setting, where we just have a pre and after treatment, a dummy, which is T here, and we have S. This is the distinction between early and late infections, because we split our sample at the median and say, okay, we have early infections and we have late infections, which is the second half of the number of infections. Then we have fixed effects, which are team times season, opponent times season fixed effects, and of course we have an error term. And then we split our effect into an event study setting that we just use for the betting markets each match day as a separate bin, and look into a prevent of -4 match days and up to 4 following match days, so as 4 legs. In the case of market values, we look at the time, how the market values evolved over time, and then we bin actually the days to capture the changes, which is slightly different, but has the same idea. All right, so then what we do then is we propose in total 4 behavioral hypotheses how the bookmakers and the users on transfermarkt.de might react following an announcement of a new infection, which implies this player is missing. The first hypothesis, of course, is to some extent the null effect, meaning that there is no statistical reaction. And what means statistical reaction in our case? We look at the first 3 moments of a distribution, of the distribution of odds for the betting markets and for the market value, which is due to the different kind of data we have for the market values, we have to set up different parameters. But let's look first at the betting market. So we have the first moment, which is the expected value of the odd, which is, I guess, kindly obvious. Then we have the variance or standard deviation. We use usually the standard deviation as a measure of dispersion of the odds, how this reacts to the information shock. And then we have gamma captures the skewness, which is, of course, to some extent still a measure of dispersion, without any doubt. But we believe that there is some higher order difference between a variance and the skewness, because you might know of the statistical artifact of Mao pairs, where you have the same expected value and the same variance, but different skewed distributions. So skewness captures, in our understanding, to some extent more some kind of rally around the flag that odds there might be still outliers which drive the variance or the variance measure of dispersion, but the rest of the bookmakers may be gathering around some leading bookmaker, and this might drive the skewness. So that's now a long explanation. For the null effect, we expect that everything will be zero, right? That's the definition of a null effect, so no reaction at all. For the market value, and I will explain this later on a bit, I guess, is the same. We have the change in the market value, and nu captures here the frequency of changes. So market values change, the change rate of market values depends on how many users interact on this forum. And this means that if users heavily contribute new evaluations, there should be a faster change than without. So these are the two measures for the market values, but let's first focus on the betting markets. The null effect, I think, is pretty obvious. There is some shock, nothing happens, end of the story. The second hypothesis is the educated adjustment. Educated adjustment is that the bookmakers or the transfer market users see there is something happening. Therefore, the expected value of the odd is changing. This might, for example, be the case that the team is weaker, and therefore the winning odd should go up, right? So the expected value should go up. But variance and skewness should be, the change in variance and skewness should be zero because it's educated. It's not like the people now make wild guesses how it changed, but they have some educated understanding how it shifted, for example. That maybe all say, okay, we have a bookmaker out of 2, and now it's 2.5, but on average, but there's not much that one bookmaker now says, oh, I guess 1.5, and the other one says, oh, I guess 5.5. But there is just a coordinated shift, so to say. Same holds for the market values. We say, okay, there's a change in market values, which is different to zero, but there's no reason why it should adjust more frequently or less frequently. This is our educated adjustment hypothesis. What one could also understand is some kind of learning hypothesis. And then we have two more hypotheses before I show you the data and the results, what we find. The second one is in contrast to the third one here is in contrast to the second one. The second one was this learning, this educated change. And the third one is some kind of uneducated change. The bookmakers, the users, they see, or they have the impression, the feeling that there is something going on. There must be something, and they just try to capture this, but they don't know how. That's why we say uneducated. So uneducated means then in total, there is no real change in the expected value, because if it would be clear in which direction to change, this should be captured like beforehand. There should be clear like a shift upwards, downwards, but if there is no real idea how to change, we would not expect an actual change in total in the expected value, but the variance changes. Because now there are wild guesses by the bookmakers, uneducated, and they try to make a guess, set an odd, but do not know how, and therefore we have higher variance, but no real change in the expected value. And equivalently, we see this for the market values, or we expect this for the market values, given this hypothesis is true, that there's no real change in the market value, but there is a change in the frequency, because now people say like, oh, there might be something going on, and post online there are new ideas how to change the market value of, I don't know, Thomas Müller or whoever got COVID-19, but they do not really know how. And the last effect is what we see often in politics in terms of crisis, and this is called the rally around the flag effect. Rally around the flag effect in politics means that the citizens, no matter how much they dispute and discuss the politics of their government in terms of a crisis, just rally around this government and support it in their reaction. And we have seen this like in many crises or in terms of war in many kinds. And in terms of betting markets, we would expect that bookmakers gather around some maybe leading bookmakers. There's often said that some Asian bookmakers might set the prices earlier than the European ones, or that there is some gathering. And we would capture this as not really a change in the expected value, maybe a decrease in the variance, because the dispersion decreases, and definitely a change in the skewness that it gets closer and closer together, the odds. And the same for market values. So not really a change, but less activity because no one really knows what to do. Therefore, people do not react or post new updates, but just wait and gather, so to say, around the existing value, which would be also some kind of status quo bias in this case for the market values. So these are 4 behavioral hypotheses, and we hope to capture all somehow reasonable reactions in what one could expect. But of course, if you have other suggestions, we are happy to hear them. And then we're going to test them empirically. What happened actually to these 3 moments of the distribution of odds? But first of all, we want to look at the benchmark. So what actually happened to a team when a player got infected, or player was announced to miss the next game? Because this is what bookmakers try to figure out, right? They figure out a result. And so we have to first look at the benchmark. What are the results? What would be rational to do? So we look at event studies, but we also look at static effects. And here you see the number, the probability to win a match. And time 0 is the first bin of this event study, is the first match affected by a newly missing player. So we set the default to -1 in the reference period, and we have the pre-trend, and we have the effect here. And what do we see actually on a 95% confidence intervals here, which are in black, the 90% are in blue. On a 95% level, there's no significant effect on the probability to win. So there's on Wednesday announcement that one player is infected and gets into quarantine. On Saturday, the team plays, but there is, on a statistical level, no effect on its probability to win this match on Saturday. So therefore, the odds we would not really expect to change. And second, we do not have this in the odds because maybe that's, I forgot to say this, we only have the closing odds for win, draw, and defeat. So we do not have opening odds or so, and we also do not have odds for the number of goals, but we still look at the number of goals, and we see the same as beforehand, right? The whole effect here separated into 4 match days is not there. There's a null effect on the number of goals scored or logarithmic number of goals scored subsequent to a newly missing player. So we would also not expect on a rational basis that something happens here, right? And as I've said beforehand, we have the static interaction between early and late infections. We also have the static plots here, and you see on the left panel again the probability of a win of the affected team. On the right hand side, the probability that the opponent wins. And you see the first is the baseline result. So we have all matches and all infections, and then we have the early ones, the first half of the infections, and the late ones are the second half of the infections. And the same is here on the right hand side. And what do we see? We see nothing, right? We don't see any affected wins for the affected team or for the opponent. And the same holds for the goals. No real effect. Neither early matches, late matches, there's nothing actually. We have new information. There is a player missing, but we know soccer is a team outcome, and we know that it is a match, or it is not a match, it is a game, and then there's a discipline with a low number of goals. So it's hard to affect this if one player is missing on a statistical basis. Yes, of course, maybe Robert Lewandowski of Bayern Munich is missing, then there are lower goals, but this is just one team. So on average, we do not see anything. All right, so this is what the data says. This is what like the true benchmark should be. We should find the null effect – because that's what we see in the data. But actually, we see something else. And this is what I'm gonna show you now. Just excuse me, I have to check. This is what I'm gonna show you now. So now we look at the moments of the actual distribution of odds. So the mean, then the standard deviation, and then the skewness. And we'll see that there is something going on, which is definitely not a null effect. So starting with the mean odds, and we have here, again, the static setting with the baseline effect and with early and late infections. And what we see is the baseline effect is at least significant on a 90% level, or on a 10% level. It's a bit better framing. But what we see is that there's nothing going on for the early effect, which would be reasonable if we just look at the second estimator here, because we would say maybe there is nothing going on, but this is a period of learning. But then, if you learn in the first half of the infection, you should learn that there is nothing going on. There is no effect on the probability to win. So it is really odd that we see that the mean odd for the second half of infections actually significantly goes up. Goes up here by 5%, which is not really plausible to our understanding, because there is no reason to go up. Equivalently, we see here, at least on a 10% level, we see that the odds for the opponent goes down, which is reasonable. In turn, of course, they have the third odd for the draw, which we do not look at here, but we can also maybe include later on or in the appendix for a robustness check. But what is like surprising is this estimator here. Why do the odds go up in the second half of the infections? Second, we look at the dispersion. All right, now let's first look at the event study. And what we see here, because this is the decomposition of the mean odd. We see there's no real pre-trend, and we see it mostly happens here at the first match after an infection. So at the first match, and this is only for the late infections. For the early infections, we do not find any static effect, and we also do not find any dynamic effect here within the event study. But for the late infections, we see this is mostly driven by this first match day. So in the first match day in the late infections, bookmakers significantly raise their odds for the affected team. This is what we see in the data, and it is not backed by the evidence we see from the actual match outcomes. So second, we have the standard deviation, and we see the same pattern. We do not have any effect for the early infections, so the first half of infections, but an increase in the standard deviation for the late infection. So not only does the mean go up, we also see that now the odds themselves are more widely spread. So bookmakers are not only assigning a lower probability to win to the affected team, they are also less secure what to offer to the customers, in the sense that the dispersion goes up. We see some kind of like the inverted pattern here for the opponent. However, this is not significant, as you can see. But it's still striking that we have a higher expected value, and still we have also higher dispersion. And looking at the event study result, it's again this first match day after the announcement. So again, just as an example, the announcements on Wednesday and on Saturday, the bookmakers have higher dispersed odds. The last part is now the skewness of the distribution. We know already that there is negative skewness in our data, so it's not completely equally dispersed, but there is some already, how shall I put it, closeness of some odds. And we see again no baseline effect, no effect for the early infections, but a negative effect for the already negative skewed distribution, so it gets more skewed. And that means there is some effect that, on the one hand, there are bookmakers really making wild guesses, which drives the dispersion, the standard deviation, and increases the range of odds offered on this match day, the first match day after a newly announced infection. And on the other hand, we see that many bookmakers get closer together and rally around each other because they might be not so sure which odd to set, and then they just maybe orientate at each other more than without such an announcement, of course. I mean, we always know that bookmakers look at each other and try to look what do they do, but more than in normal times. All right. So yeah, decomposing this, it's a bit more difficult for the skewness. We still see flat pre-trends, and we see the first effect is only significant on a 10% level, as you see, as the 5% level hits the 0 line here. But still, I mean, we lose a lot of econometric power, statistical power in this event study plot. So we still consider this as an interesting and important evidence that it's happening mostly on the first match day. So what we see is, in summary, for the early infections, we see no effect at all. No change in the mean, no change in the standard deviation, no change in the skewness. On the other hand, we see all of this for the late infections, so the second half of the infections, which is surprising, right? Because, I mean, as said before, for early infections, there might be always this kind of status quo bias, and it needs time to adjust, time to react, and especially in the beginning, no one knew really what COVID means. And of course, a player is missing, but we had a lot of things going on there. And the missing players, I mean, they should be always incorporated, or else maybe they should be never incorporated, because we know there is no effect going on in the numbers, and the bookmakers should knew this because they already had missing players from, I don't know, the flu, or players get hurt by something, whatever they miss. And bookmakers should know what this means for the rest of the team if one player is missing due to whatever reason. But we see that there is this effect in late infections, and this seems to be this is surprising, right? Because this does not really fit into any behavioral pattern, and this can we also show you with these 4 hypotheses we have proposed. For early infections, we see definitely a null effect. Nothing happens, we would expect this, null effect satisfied. We cannot reject the null effect, so to say. On the other hand, looking at the late infections here, for none of the 4 hypotheses we have proposed, everything is satisfied. We have for the null effect nothing satisfied, because for every moment there is something going on. This is not 0, the effect. And for the educated adjustment, we see that there is there is a change in the mean, and there's a change in the variance. So this is correct, but we do not see why there should be a change in the skewness. And second, we should put this in brackets, actually, the change in the mean, because we do not see any change in the probability to win. So why should there be a higher effect? For uneducated uncertainty, yes, we see the increase in the standard deviation, but we also see this effect on the mean, as has been said. And for the rally around the flag effect, yes, we see this change in skewness. So there seems to be some rallying around each other, but the rest is not really reasonable. All right. So before getting to the market values, which is the second part, we also have to take into account, and we try to address this in more detail, and now in the upcoming weeks when Kai and I are going to work on this. But of course, bookmakers and bookmaking odds are not only driven by the probability to win, but also they're kind of trying to steer the customers, right? So if all the players, the customers, to distinguish this from soccer players, if all the customers bet on Real Madrid against Barcelona, they might want to raise the odd for Barcelona to steer some customers towards Barcelona. But in our case, we do not find any behavioral pattern why the customers now for late infections should react in a way that the bookmakers would steer the customers towards the affected team by raising the expected odd. And also, we do not find any reason why the dispersion should go up. Because, of course, different bookmakers have different types of customers. Some are rather professional players or have more professional players in there. Some of more like they bet 10 euros for fun. But still, this is always the case. And we do not know, or there is no real reason, at least for us, maybe you have some input for us, and it would be really great, why the steering should affect or drive these effects. Because we always have the case, as said earlier, we always have the case that players are missing. And why should these customers react so much to it? This is what we wonder, and therefore we think it's still driven by the bookmakers. Which doesn't make it any better, because it's a strange behavioral pattern here in the market inefficiency, clearly. But just to reason this. All right, then I get to the second and I think shorter part of this presentation, which is the market values. And it's therefore shorter. We would also like to dig deeper into it. But for market values, I mean, some of you have already worked with the data. It's somehow limited in what they can tell you and the information about it, because we all know that there is a transfer market seems to be a strong source and a reliable source in the sense how well they predict something. But on the other hand, we know that there is kind of an obscure mechanism behind how the data get actually translate into these market values on this platform. So what we do for market values is, we know that from our earlier paper, I've already mentioned that players suffer a significant and persistent drop in their productivity subsequent to a COVID infection, right? So there should be, contrary to the null effects for the match outcomes, there should be for the individual player outcomes an effect be visible, right? Because if you play worse, on average, you should on average have a lower market value. I mean, of course, the users of the firm don't know, and also we do not know how long this is going to take, and maybe this is going to diminish over time, this productivity effect over, I don't know, years or so. But at least what we found in the data for up to 8 to 9 months is that nothing diminishes. Once you have got this infection, you are persistently weaker in terms of productivity, and therefore we argue this should be reflected in the market values. And as said before, we have two measures. We have the market value itself, the change in the market value, and we have the frequency of changes, what we look at. And first, we look at the actual values, and we see here a flat pre-trend, even though admittedly we have here really large error bars. But we do not see a real effect. Actually, we see here, at least on the 10% level, an increase. But we think we should not overinterpret this, and especially if we look at the static effect, which is highly insignificant. I mean, you see there is, the estimator is 0.057, and the standard error is nearly the size of the estimator, so we do not find anything here. Right? So actually the market values do not really react to the announcement of an infection. And as a second measure, we have the frequency of changes. And here comes something what is really stunning for us, is that after this really flat pre-trend, we see this persistent drop in the frequency to change the market value subsequent to an infection of a player. So if a player gets updated market value every 3 months or so, now this really drops. We really see this effect here of minus 1.7%, which is highly significant on a 1% level. I mean, looking at the standard error here, we see that this drop happens in the static effect and dynamically in the event study, the frequency of changes goes down. So the market values of infected player get on a less frequently adjusted, which somehow means there is some surprising inertia, right? We see, okay, the players do not play, and now these forum users, I mean, the players are in the media, and there is the knowledge that they are infected, but the frequency goes down of the number of adjustments, which for us is a hint that the users on this forum are somehow, yeah, they're insecure and don't know what to suggest. And therefore, I mean, we cannot completely rely on this measure because the problem is we have this twofold system of market value changes. There's one, the users and their frequency to write comments on the player's value, but there are also this super users or admins who actually decide about a change in the market value. So it might be the case that the forum users reduce their activity subsequent to infection, but it might be also the case that the super users decide to wait longer to adjust for to adjust the market value, which is in both cases interesting because also the super users might be stuck and there might be there's no reason for us why they should not adjust the market value. And again, maybe they think there is something going on, they don't know what is going on, and then there is some inertia, right? And again, this does not really fit into our behavioral hypotheses. We do not really see, I mean, it's actually, it might be some rallying around the flag, meaning rallying around the status quo, but it's still not really reasonable, especially in light of the fact that there should be a market value change, at least if we follow our earlier definition in our earlier paper of finding that there is some productivity decline, right? So this is again an efficiency pattern or inefficiency pattern, which is difficult to explain. And this is also the last thing I want to show you, because I think it's now time to wrap up. This is what we have up to now. As said beforehand, this is still work in progress. So to sum up, we have an analysis of the incorporation of novel information, which is in COVID-19 infection and the subsequent quarantine, why a player misses a match, into the existing prediction models of for a high and a low stakes environment. The high stakes are obviously the betting odds because there's lots of money involved, and low stakes is transfer mark because the users, the admins do this for free and for fun. We have several behavioral hypotheses proposed, but none of them could really be confirmed. And for both groups, for the betting market actors and also for those involved in transfer market, we see some inertia in the early infections, or here for betting, for transfer market in the frequency, but still unstructured activity, especially in the betting market, especially for late infections. And there's no real market reason why they should do this. And this is why we call this market inefficiency, what we at least claim to have identified, as some behavior like rabbits caught in the headlights of a car, which might be stuck at first and completely paralyzed by the car they see, but then they might just frolic around nervously and try to panic, not try, but panic actually, and run around without really a structure, an idea how to escape this car. So this is the title, and this is also our bottom line. We suspect there a market inefficiency like rabbits caught in the headlines. That's it from my side. Thank you for your attention. And now I'm happy to take your questions, remarks, and also suggestions, because last time I want to mention it, it's work in progress, and we're really happy to hear from you and have suggestions in which direction to proceed with this paper. All right.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you, Benedikt. And now I'm going to give you a team's applause, and obviously everyone else, feel free to give Benedikt a team's applause. Thank you very much for what was a really interesting talk. I've written down quite a few questions, but I think I'd rather let lots of other people ask you questions first off. So questions and comments from anybody in the audience. Thomas, you've appeared. Do you have a question or?
Not really. My internet was interrupted from time to
Okay.
time, so that's why I switched it
Those
off and now
Teams.
back on. Yeah. Nice paper.
Any questions on comments? While folk think of questions, on your transfer mark stuff, Benedikt,
Yeah.
did you split that? Because obviously you split your early analysis on the early and the late infections. Have you done that for the transfer marked analysis as well? And were there differences between early and late ones if you did?
That's a good suggestion. So we haven't done this yet. This is the whole market up to now. We have split the betting market data, and yeah, regarding transfer market, we only have the whole data set right now, but we can split this. This is, yeah, as I said, work in progress. We try to extend the analysis, but this is I think a good thing to think about for the next step. Yeah.
And then kind of a question related to your betting analysis. Obviously, you look at mean the variance and then the skewness of the odds. I mean, I might have missed this or not picked up the wrong end of the stick, but you were kind of talking about some bookmakers responding differently, I guess, outliers in their reactions. And it made me think whether the kurtosis might be better, or at least an additional thing to look at alongside skewness. I guess if you might have some bookmakers moving out in terms of that, as you say, unstructured kind of not sure what to do, you'd see a more kind of whatever, fatter tails perhaps in the distribution of odds. I don't know, just a thought that again the kurtosis might also be something interesting to look at in terms of how bookmakers are reacting.
Yeah, definitely. I've also thought about it. I mean, this is the fourth moment and not reasonable to think about, but I'm not quite sure like how. I mean, you have to give this an economic interpretation, and I think it's. I'm gonna think about this, but up to now we haven't come up with a really plausible economic interpretation why the kurtosis would add explanatory detail to our analysis, and add something we do not capture already with dispersion and skewness. But yeah.
I mean, I guess because it's odds, isn't it, you're looking at, and of course they do kind of have that big tail, so skewness would pick up if the odds were picking up.
Yeah.
So I think probably skewness is probably better given you're looking at odds than kurtosis. I think so. Yeah.
All right, but thank you. We're gonna look at this for sure. Yeah.
Questions and comments from the audience?
Let me do one. It's more of a comment than a question in the sense that I was recently in a PhD jury from Jonas van den Bruaan. I don't know if you ever came across that name. He wrote a big literature survey in JSC about well, all these papers on betting, basically. And he also had a chapter in there about how quickly the market responds to new information. Now, I'm not sure what his plans are with this chapter because he might or might not be sending it out for publication. But I'll try to find it and send it to you, so you can have a look at what these guys have done. I'm sure that their approach is radically different from yours, so it's not a competitor for your paper, but it's perhaps a nice addition to cite.
Yeah, thanks for this information. It's always good to hear what other people do. But really, really great if you could send it to me or to us. I also put my email in the chat if anyone else wants to reach out. This is my my email, schmal@dice.hhu.de. And if you want to send me something or some questions, some comments, I'm always happy to answer them and discuss them. So yeah, thank you to you, Thomas, and to anyone else who wants to reach out.
Maxence has his hand up.
Thank you, Benedikt, for your presentation. It was very interesting. I have just a question about COVID waves or vaccination. I'm not, I don't know exactly how it worked in Bundesliga and Serie A. Was vaccination mandatory? And if so, when? Is there maybe something here? Have you seen something in a time basis? I don't know.
So we do not have vaccinations in there because at the end of 2021 there was no vaccination for these groups in Germany and Italy, because the vaccination was just about to start in early 2021 in Europe, like in March or so, and then soccer players were not like later in the queue, right? Because mostly personal health staff was vaccinated, so we have no vaccinated players in the setting. That's what we on purpose restrict our sample to the end of the 2021 season, because then in summer and autumn, of course, also many at least of the soccer players got vaccinated. And yes, of course, there are COVID waves, and there are like the number of infections is not linear in time because there are the waves, but the main what we think about is it's not necessarily like the COVID effect for transfer market values for sure. This is about the productivity effect, but for the betting values and the betting odds, it's more the effect that players are missing, and then it's not relevant whether they're like missing vaccinated or unvaccinated. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks for the question.
Thanks, Maxence. Any more questions and comments? Another quick one from me is you were talking about the behavior of bookmakers, Benedikt. I wondered if you were able to pick up any betting exchange odds through Odds Portal when you were scraping the data.
We can pick up two. I think Betfair, of course, and the second one, I guess I forgot the name, I'm afraid. The problem is there right now we are not really sure how to utilize this, because from two there at the end we have sadly only the closing odds, and from this we have only two we have, so to say, two odds, and we cannot really infer anything statistically from these two odds. So we have this, and that's really interesting. We have talked to you and also with Carl about especially Betfair, Bet Exchange, but at that point it's unclear to us how to exploit this in statistical terms.
Yeah, my thought was just because obviously you're trying to infer bookmaker behavior and these different types of responses, and I guess it could be interesting to at least see what the exchanges do. But you're right, you don't have any kind of distribution of exchange odds, but you do have them across all the matches at least. So I don't know whether that gives you anything. You've probably got a mean effect, obviously not a variance effect to some extent.
Yeah, of course. So that's super interesting to distinguish between like professional bookmakers and the market generated price. But yeah, still, there have this limitation. And if we get an idea how to overcome this or how to utilize this, we will definitely put this into the paper. And again, if you have some suggestions, we're really happy about any suggestions in this direction. Yeah, but that's interesting, these bet exchanges. Yeah.
Okay, questions and comments? Any last few? If not, then we thank Benedikt for his talk. Thank you very much, Benedikt. I'm going to give you a little bit more team's applause. And it's been great to see you online now, having had you in Reading over the last week and a bit. And thanks for a really interesting talk. And we look forward to seeing how your paper develops. Next week, we currently have a blank spot in the schedule. We have 2 weeks that are blank the next 2 weeks because that was my original holiday plans, which have now been shifted back, which means I can't make the ESEA conference in Helsinki, sadly. What it means is we've got one of the talks, not next Friday, but the Friday after, taken up by Mobolaji Alabai, who's a PhD student here in Reading, finishing up with finance and football. But if anyone has something that they're keen to present and would like to present next Friday, there is an open slot for anybody who would like to present. So if you do, drop me an email between now and then, basically. But the sooner, the more we can get in terms of advertising it and spreading word about the talk. But if not, we'll have a week off next week, and we'll return on August the 5th with Mobolaji Alabai from the University of Reading presenting some of his work on finance and football. And it leaves us to therefore wish you all a great weekend and look forward to seeing you all again very soon. Thanks very much, everybody. Thanks, Benedikt. See you soon.
All right. Thank you and goodbye.